This is a pipeline and positioning presentation for business developers, bid teams, designers, construction and supply teams. Now, the main message here is that Queensland has some real near-term opportunities, but the bigger value sits later in the forward estimates. So in unapproved and capability-led signals. And this slide really sums it up. This is the headline. The forecast spend over the next decade to 2035 in Queensland, around 4.2 billion, which is up 318 million from July last year. So Defence, Security and Estate Group provides two major updates each year. And what I've really done is compared and contrasted the two to look for those shifts. What's happened is the overall spend has increased, but the deadlines have shifted to the right. This matters because you as business development teams, you can waste a lot of time on those outer year forecasts thinking that value is immediate pipeline. It isn't. Okay, my advice is to really track those defined packages hard, but also building capability and building evidence to support that later wave that'll come through. So I'll have some diagrams later that describe that in more detail. So just to set your expectations, this is not investment advice. All I'm doing is comparing public forecast signals and looking at the SEG briefings really closely and viewing them through the lens of the current public signals that we're seeing. Ministerial briefs, federal papers, a whole range of different signals to get an informed view of what's going on. All right, approved forecasts, I need to put a quick disclaimer. They are useful as a signal, but they're no firm commitment of actual spend. Okay, it really goes without saying. So this is a Queensland conversation. And if you stay tuned, many of you online will have attended my other presentations for other regions. I was in the Northern Territory last week giving a similar presentation and happy to share those notes. We've heard a lot of broad language about Northern Australia and the opportunity for building resilience in Northern Australia. It's all over the latest National Defence Strategy. But what we all really want is actionable advice. It's really important to make that distinction between tenders that are actually coming out and projects that are real enough to track, and then those strategic signals further down the pipeline that are into the 2030s. Those are very different levels of certainty, and a lot can change between now and then. They shouldn't be pursued in the same way. So these are a few of the sources there. I won't go into them in detail. The charts that you'll see later on are based on a model derived from the SEG briefing notes. A lot of online research goes into this just to add that strategic context and try and confirm any recent defence announcements. Anyone who's looked through federal budget papers knows just how challenging that can be to turn that into real actionable insights. But okay, so what's changed between July and November? The headline is more money, but not more certainty. The total grew from about 3.92 billion to 4.24. That approved value shrank as the backlog of approved work cleared through the second half of last year. So the uplift that we see is mainly in unapproved work being added to the back end of the decade forecast. It's worth noticing that last month's National Defence Strategy has really made some interesting comments about alternative financing, and that's a new signal that we're seeing come through. It's been something that Defence has steered away from. They have a real preference for owning everything, but this NDS has really admitted that AUKUS commitments have really left the coffers bare, but Donald Trump at the same time is demanding an increase in our defence spending to over that 3% GDP threshold. So the government has tabled a cunning plan to harness private capital as a way to top up defence's budget. And estate infrastructure has been labelled as the primary candidate for that private capital. Okay. So we'll get into a bit more of that later. All this change, however, takes time. So what this slide shows is the funding from orange, which is from July. So the dark is approved and the lighter colour is unapproved. And then in blue, you've got the November numbers. So again, the dark is approved, the light is unapproved. And we're seeing that from July to November, everything shifted to the right. So not until 2029 that you see an uplift. That is consistent with what we're seeing. Projects are being either deprioritized or shifted to the right unless it involves basically anything to do with AUKUS and HMAS Stirling in Western Australia. So the growth is later, but it's less certain. Looking at a site-by-site level, this tells the real story. So RAF-based Townsville has the biggest uplift with $607 million added to the capital works program in that location. Laverack, Amberley and HMAS Cairns have also seen increases. And at the same time, Townsville Field Training Area has fallen sharply. RAF Sherga has disappeared altogether, and HMAS Moreton has also disappeared. So this is not random. This points to that reshaping of priorities following the Defence Strategic Review 2024, air posture, rotary wing in Townsville, maritime littoral, a shift away from a mechanised infantry-based force to a littoral manoeuvre posture in our army, and prioritising enabling infrastructure that enables capability rather than a broad training area renewal that characterised the Defence Estate Works program prior to the release of the review. Okay, so everything is now focused on capability rather than just focused on the standard or the previous 10-year cycle of base redevelopment, midterm refresh, base redevelopment, midterm refresh. Okay, if it doesn't contribute to a capability, and that's a priority capability, it's being turned off completely. Okay, this is the practical slide for the room. So the largest signals here are not evenly spread across Queensland. Townsville and Cairns, Amberley and Laverack really dominate, as I said. Gallipoli, Barracks and Borneo still relevant because this is where they create those near-term entry points. So the new projects that are coming online shortly. So for this BD teams, the signal here is site-based targeting, getting to know individual sites. Where do you have evidence? Where can you build evidence through things like the Estate Works program in order to position yourself for these bases when the jobs arrive? That's my advice. Don't build a generic Queensland pursuit list. Build a site and a capability pathway list. Okay, so regionally split. This is important for Brisbane-based firms. I think this shows quite clearly North Queensland is where it's at. Brisbane is not irrelevant. There is design, program control. There's headquarters elements, for example, the Littoral Group. There's airbase and there's estate works opportunities in Brisbane. But by far the larger estate volume is North Queensland, which represents that defence strategy prioritising the north. So firms without credible North Queensland delivery models are going to be exposed. Conversely, North Queensland firms shouldn't assume that all the work will go to local firms. If they can't meet security, assurance and documentation and that prime interface requirements, then Defence will entertain interstate or southern-based businesses to do that work. Let's zoom now into the projects, and I won't list every single project, but I'm deliberately looking at the near-term opportunities. This is work that's real enough to track in 2026 and the outer year signals that are the strongest. So the list isn't that long, you'll notice, but that's useful in itself. This will separate the actual year near-term pursuit work from the vague future value. So the November SEG brief described Amberley having some fire truck packages and 2 Borneo projects. So the Borneo Barracks facilities and Borneo Barracks redevelopment. So that sort of mid-level $13 to $45 million range. There's also the AFV Stage 3. So this one is armoured fighting vehicles, 3 locations there: Gallipoli Barracks, Laverack and Townsville. Then you've got the Army Littoral Facilities Program. So we're yet to have an official announcement of where those are actually going, but we do know that there will be one either in Cairns or Townsville, and then one in Brisbane, as well as obviously one in Darwin that's outside of the scope of this brief. And then finally, the National ICT Main Works. So that is a national project, I'm told around 64 different sites, MC project, and a big chunk of that will be in Queensland. So the audience here won't be chasing these all at the same time, all in the same way. Each opportunity has nuanced requirements. Just going into them in detail. So Borneo Barracks is really a good example of a smaller project that matters strategically. This is something the November brief shifted both packages. It talked about a program approach, and it flagged IPP, so Indigenous procurement pathways, and also the need for DISP, so DISP accredited companies. We're talking Zone 5 work, so not glamorous, but capability specific, so secure facilities, heavy ICT, utilities, and that Zone 5 layered security. Your resources would absolutely need to have a strong CV to be competitive on this work. Next up, the AFV Stage 3. So this is probably the most practical near-term opportunity for many firms in the room. The value here is substantial, and the scope is familiar enough, I think, for builders and suppliers, but it's still a capability-led project. So all in support of this, the rollout of the new armoured fighting vehicles. So the likely sites there: Gallipoli, Laverack and Townsville. It's a 2-stage process, so an ITR followed by the RFT, and you're going to want to watch to how the works packages are broken up, and subcontractors will likely be mapping the prime bidders that will be working towards tendering on this. Amberley is a bit of a mixed bag. There's not one single project out this year. There's some near-term SEG packages. The aviation field fire truck capability works was advertised as early 2026. I haven't seen it come out. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone's seen that one hit the market yet. So the public OSMIN comments from December specifically referenced that there will be further infrastructure investments by the US. So as part of the US Force Posture Initiative, that adds to I think the story at Amberley. So they're looking to support increased rotations of US fighters, and not only that, but the bombers and the ISR surveillance aircraft here at Amberley. So that's big news to look for probably further into the future. But for now, yes, there's the fire truck projects are probably the nearest opportunity, and I think that involves some simulation training facility, something to do with firefighting simulation. Cairns is probably one of the largest sort of outer year signals that we're seeing. So public defence releases have shown there's that landing craft program is moving. There are 8 landing craft heavy vessels and then 18 medium vessels that are under construction. The tenders have been signed, the contracts have been signed over in Henderson in Western Australia, so they're getting built, and they will be arriving in the next 12 to 18 months. They'll begin to arrive. So a new littoral manoeuvre group has now been established that's headquartered here in Brisbane, and the SEG brief said that the Army Littoral Facilities Program will include, like I said, Northeast Queensland, Southeast Queensland and Darwin, but the estate package is not fully defined. So we're expecting mid this year that will be announced as to where it actually is. This is a positioning market, not a tender scramble just yet, but expect some clarity in sort of mid-year. It's a low sensitivity logistics type infrastructure with a commercial potential. So it's not warfighting capability as such. For that reason, expect plenty of potential for private financing, potentially dual use infrastructure. So, for example, Cairncross Shipyard here on the Brisbane River is a prime candidate for a dual use infrastructure opportunity there. So there's plenty of room for expansion landside, as well as there's places to turn those large vessels on the Brisbane River. So there's a World War II era dry dock there that could be redeveloped to support both defence and also private vessel maintenance. And that could offset the costs. Expect things to start moving as soon as defence strikes a deal with the existing private owners. Townsville, this is the central North Queensland cluster. RAF Townsville growing sharply in the Northern Territory in the November comparison. Laverack also grew, but Townsville field training area fell more than $450 million as defence shifted its focus, like I said, from mechanised infantry to littoral manoeuvre. That means that the story isn't everything in Townsville is going up. It's not. It's more selective than that. So that rotary aviation, maritime facilities and logistics support are being prioritised there, while some of the inland training areas are either being reduced or moved. And Brisbane, Gallipoli Barracks matters because it links the AFV facilities with the Army's new littoral manoeuvre structure. So that littoral manoeuvre group was formally recognised in March this year, and the headquarters and the 1st Landing Craft Battalion are based there at Gallipoli Barracks. So for Brisbane-based firms, this is going to create early access advantages. So local proximity for those opportunities when they come through. Again, that getting your evidence of security clearances, your supporting systems and your workforce is what's going to matter when these tenders start to drop. All right, so zooming out now to the 2026 NDS and the IIP, which is the Integrated Investment Plan. And why do they matter? So this slide really connects or summarises what the Integrated Investment Plan looks like now. It says $425 billion over the decade. That's everything that Defence is looking to spend. It explicitly supports that an army that is optimised for littoral operations with the landing craft, the long-range strike is another component, and a credible combined arms land system. The Air Force needs to be able to provide the surveillance and the air defence, as well as the strike and the air transport capability, and then looking at strengthening cyber and space capabilities as well. So that's really what describes, I think, the logic behind the Queensland site movements. So it really is time to rethink how you go to market for defence capital projects. The next wave was still going to need builders, designers and suppliers, but it will not be won by treating the estate as generic buildings. It's about operational outcomes. So keeping those vessels sustained, keeping the aircraft generated, the sorties generated and the missiles stored safely, protected networks, integrated radars, and bases that are able to recover after disruption. So you need to translate your value proposition in these terms. So this is where a lot of the BD teams really that I talk to really underperform. So they wait for the AusTender announcements, and then they complain that the market was already wired against them. In reality, the defence estate, the opportunity path often runs through the PMCA, through the DSC, through the major construction panel, limited tenders, Indigenous procurement shortlists, and now increasingly alternative financing. So the remedy here isn't just more networking. It's about targeting relationships, targeted and doing some relationship mapping around the packages, the actual packages and procurement pathways that you're looking to chase. Talking about the subcontractors now. So for subcontractors and suppliers, this slide shows how those strategic signals are then being translated into practical work types. So they are likely opportunity lanes that are inferred by the project scope. So whether you're delivering civil pavements or HV power, ICT, security solutions, HVAC, maritime infrastructure, accommodation, or environmental solutions, there is something for you in the coming capital works program. So I think firms should really use this as their plan to help with their positioning strategies over the next 12 months. So the right behavior here is about that discipline tracking of those specialist packages. Early security, getting your security clearances, getting your evidence together, ready for these opportunities to become live, and targeted teaming, so building those partnership deals. So I really discourage that sort of over expansion on the basis that there's big numbers being discussed and chasing those outer year signals. Today, it's about surviving the gap between today's approved infrastructure and next decade's major works, surviving that through really careful positioning and waiting for those larger waves to appear. So I'm going to be blunt with you. Most firms do not lose defence work because they're not enthusiastic enough. They lose it because they're late, they're generic, and they're under evidenced or unclear about what the delivery pathways actually are. So if you treat the strategic forecast like a tender pipeline, you're going to waste a lot of BD resources. But if you don't build that security and an assurance capability early, what's going to happen is you might have a lot of friendly faces and a lot of nodding heads, but you'll be quietly screened out of contention in favour of those who have. So what to do next? It's really simple. The priority is not to try and memorize all the project acronyms, and there's a lot of them out there. These numbers do tend to change, but priority is to watch the movement, understand who the sponsors are and what the underlying capability they're trying to achieve, understand who the PMCA companies are. They really are the top of the food chain when it comes to defence's trusted advisors, and to understand the panels and how they operate and who uses them. And then obviously the prime contractors, knowing the major construction panel, who the big players are there, who are the new kids on the block, who are the existing incumbents. Lastly, I just want to say the current pipeline in Queensland is very real. The near-term opportunities, however, are pretty selective. The larger wave is that later capability-led opportunity. The Defence is putting a lot of its eggs in Western Australia right now. The work in Northern Territory is starting to tail off as the backlog of work is being completed up there. And we're seeing South Australia probably as the next big thing as Osborne starts to ramp up and the submarine capability starts to grow some momentum. America, anyone's guess, they've invested over $1 billion in Northern Territory in the last few years, and there's probably still 500-600 million to come, but all that's already under contract and we don't know what their next movement is. So keep tracking these public signals. Next week there'll be the federal budget. Keep an eye on my page. I'll be the first to pick that apart and share with you my read on what's coming out of that. Alternative financing, get creative. Look for the consortia as they grow. There will be opportunities there. It's a much more open playing field when it comes to private funding of some of this critical infrastructure. But you can guarantee that the security requirements will still be there. I'll probably close by saying there's a link there to get a free defence access readiness check. It's a service that we've developed. So decnet.com.au/ help you understand the next steps towards achieving that security, freedom of movement, understand where the next blockers are in your growth, and make sure that that isn't what's holding you back when the next opportunities arrive. On that note, I'll close up and open the floor for questions.
Question. With the potential of private investing, do you see any particular infrastructure that would be more beneficial than they're going to take an airport or something like that? To get an idea of what sort of projects might be aligned for private investment?
Yeah, absolutely. And glad you asked because that's the topic of my next white paper. So it really is anything that has a dual use opportunity, right? And airfields are a great example.
Yeah.
So think like for example, in the Northwest, you've got mine sites that have airfields. It might be with a small investment, your airfield will be ready to use as surge capacity.
Yeah.
Same for boat ramps, right? Same for power generation. Fuel is a huge one, right? So defense is looking to build capability without paying for it. So build surge capability. We're not talking about peacetime capability. We're talking about when stuff gets real. Okay, what are they going to need? Okay, so how do you fund that? Because the world works on utilization. You build a port, you want an anchor tenant who's going to commit to utilizing it for a particular period. That doesn't work when you're trying to speculate. No one's going to speculate on when a conflict is going to occur. But a better way to look at it is in terms of availability, right? And defense will be prepared to pay for availability. That might mean different threat levels under the contract. We say threat level A, it's yours to lease commercially, but at a certain threat level, it becomes a 50-50 or 100% defense. And if you can make your infrastructure work under those conditions, there might be data centers. That's another example, right?
Yeah.
Anything that has a joint use, okay? It's where it's not going to work, when that model is not going to be favorable, is where it's inside the wire, one single user, and it cannot be configured for any commercial private usage. That's where I think it's much less bankable for a private financier to bankroll. And it doesn't necessarily just include fixed infrastructure, right? Logistics equipment could be the case. It might be hire equipment, plant equipment, anything defense uses, white fleet. We're going to see some creativity, I think, in the future to find ways to get assets off the balance sheet and onto the OPEX. Any other questions?
Hi, Darian. It's Marianne Mikulich here from GPA Engineering.
Hey,
how you going?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, the PMCAs for projects that aren't released on AusTender, how do we find out who the PMCAs are?
That's a good question. Yeah. So they will generally include on AusTender when they're looking for advice from the market, they'll post market sounding. That's until that point, they're not in receive mode, and then they're not really interested in being courted.
Fair
They've
enough.
got you got to understand that the PMCA contracts are awarded to the lowest bidder, and they don't generally include too much time with business developers in their tendering. They're focused on dealing with the stakeholders. So yeah, look, it comes down to relationships as well, keeping your ear to the ground. I do my best to try and figure it out, but generally speaking, until that procurement PDDP, it's called, the project development and delivery plan, is bedded down, they tend to keep their heads pretty low.
Yeah, and just that comment about the lowest bidder, is that always the case, or is that just a general case?
Look, they're consultants, they work on hourly rates, right? If they had entire teams dedicated to market sounding, they probably would price themselves out of the market. So their time is precious, as you can imagine.
Yep, understood. Thanks for that.
Look, my email's there. If you have any questions, something else comes up, please let me know. I will be sharing the the slides on the website and sending around a link to download them. Apologies there. I saw the writing was a little bit small and a few people frantically trying to take notes. Yeah, rest assured it'll come through on the email. All right. Good afternoon, and talk to you all again. The next one is Western Australia. We're going up to Western Australia on Tuesday, the 26th of May to talk WA pipeline. See you then.